Welcome, everyone. My name is Dana White. I'm the host of the Myth Salon, but today we're doing something other than the Myth Salon. It's called Pulling Focus. This is our second Pulling Focus. The first one we did with the David Bohm film, Infinite Potential, and it was so successful. We're thrilled today to be bringing you Changing of the Gods, a film directed by Kenny Ausubel and featuring a good deal of participation from Dr. Rick Tarnas. I'd like to thank Pacifica Graduate Institute, the Alumni Association, for their unwavering support of the various projects that Linn and I are bringing forth to the community. So today, what a beautiful afternoon. After we finish the film, we're going to have a conversation between Rick Tarnas and Kenny Ausubel that'll be joined by Safron Rossi and Becca Tarnas. So, with that in mind, let's settle back. Let's grab some popcorn, if you've got it. It's a little bit before dinner. And let's watch the first of the 10 episodes of Changing of the Gods.
Wow. My fourth time through this first episode, and I still just get absolutely overwhelmed by thoughts and ideas every time. Is this a series about archetypal astrology or the paradigmatic shifting so many of us feel today? My name is Linn, and I'm the founder of mythhouse.org and the general education department at Husson College, where I teach courses on myth and philosophy to filmmakers and performing artists. Before we get started, I just want to thank Pacifica Alumni Association for supporting this event and our friend Corinne Bordeaux for putting it together. It's my absolute privilege to moderate tonight. We'll begin with a brief interview before opening into a panel that includes Safron Rossi and Becca Tarnas. For the interview, I'm honored to introduce Kenny Ausubel. Kenny is the co-director of Changing the Gods and founder of Bioneers, which many of you have heard of. Bioneers is an innovative nonprofit organization that highlights breakthrough solutions for restoring people and planet. It acts as a fertile hub of social and scientific innovators with practical and visionary solutions for the world's most pressing environmental and social challenges. And beyond this basic introduction, I hope everyone will indulge me in a personal note. Some of you know that Myth House put together the learning technology and narrative structure for a certificate course that we made for Al Gore's Climate Reality and the Harvard Alumni Association. And what many of you may not know is that with the help of Corinne Bordeaux and the blessing of Kenny Ausubel, speakers from Bioneers supercharged that event. And that event has been doing a lot of good since then. So already we're seeing major leadership-driven changes. So it's been a real privilege to have had Kenny's support in making a positive influence on the world together. And here he is, as always, tirelessly. And for those of us who know him, they know I really mean tirelessly making the world a better place. Thanks for being with us tonight, Kenny.
Hey, my pleasure. And I just want to say I'm sincerely honored to be with this community of Pacifica and the Jung Societies and with you, Will. I've gotten to know you over the last few months, and it's been a very rich experience. So I'm sincerely honored to be here.
Thank you. Next, it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Richard Tarnas, the author of Cosmos and Psyche, as well as Passion of the Western Mind. Dr. Tarnas earned his undergraduate in psychology from Harvard and PhD in philosophy from Saybrook before joining as head of education at Salon Institute, where he worked with Stan Grof, Joseph Campbell, and a number of other luminaries over the past century. From there, he became the founding chair of the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness PhD program at the California Institute of Integral Studies, also known as CIIS. And along the way, he served as the philosophy teacher in my own PhD program in mythology and depth psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute, where he often gives lectures and contributes to the community. He's also served on the board of governors for the Jung Institute of San Francisco. Thanks for being here with us tonight, Dr. Tarnas, and I hope that you'll indulge me in one more personal note. though this is our first official collaboration, I've been looking for a way to connect with you for a decade now. It was in 2012 that I asked if you'd join my committee for a dissertation on intellectual history. And of course, I'm lucky you said no, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to use so much of your work in my writing. I know we're here tonight for Cosmos and Psyche, but I can't recommend Passion of the Western Mind enough, which is now the textbook for the philosophy course I teach young artists. So I want to thank you for this work. This meant so much to me. And I thought I might invite you to say hello to my students from the philosophy class, many of which are going to be here tonight. What was it like to be working on this film, knowing that you were going into the transit that it was about, and that you were going to see things happen? And then what did you see happen? Well, it must have just been like a slow motion, intense experience. So what was that like to see Me Too and Black Lives Matter and COVID all unfold before your eyes as you're doing this project?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question, Will. And I compare it to making a movie about riding a bucking bronco while riding a bucking bronco, basically. And of course, Rick's book and the chapter in particular on Uranus Pluto was a roadmap for us. And there were specific areas of human activity, human affairs, where these transits regularly do manifest. And so we had a kind of taxonomy of different social arenas that we were looking at. And I first read the book in August 2012. I got the seed funding in early 2013. And then we actually went into production in 2015. But by 2013, about midway through the transit or a little more, I was already starting to put that lens on the news. And my wife is very happy because for about 6 years, I watched pundits constantly on TV. It's a movie and we had to visualize it. And that was a handful. I'm a news junkie, so it wasn't that terrible, but it was a bit overwhelming. But yeah, no, it was kind of stunning because it was archetypally predictable. And also, I would say, we've all lived through this period now, and we're in this sort of interregnum before the trine comes around. But at the same time, the transit had this slam bang finale, between George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, and January 6th, right? So right up, we really had to follow the transit to the end, which was not the original plan. And in truth, the story would have been incomplete without doing that. And we picked January 6th basically as the cutoff. But, I'll give you just a few examples. In episode two and three are about political revolutions, but the growth of youth movements, which has been phenomenal. The WTF moment where suddenly Trump is elected and blows up all these political dynasties, geopolitical revolutions, the rise of China and Russia during this time. And of course, the exposure of the U.S. democracy theme park, for what it is. And then the next episode 3, is all about plutocracy and democracy versus plutocracy. And the age we're living in now tipped into being worse than the Gilded Age, right? More extreme. So episode by episode, obviously, I don't have to tell people what's happened with the women's movements. And as always, these archetypes are multivalent. So it's the story of revolution and counter-revolution. I mean, it is not, puppies and unicorns here at all. It depends what day, who's up or who's down. And then you mentioned Black Lives Matter and the extraordinary, Black liberation movements that have risen and evolved in new ways. There's one episode that's kind of an outlier that I think would be of special interest to the Jung community, which is the episode called From Othering to Belonging, the Circle of Human Concern. And that was kind of an outlier. I filmed the material anyway. It's a Professor John Powell from UC Berkeley. And this is part of his main work, is about how do we overcome scapegoating and xenophobia and othering in all its forms. And I didn't really know that would fit in the paradigm of the Uranus Pluto, but I shot it anyway. And I think that one may end up being the outlier of the whole series. But I think it's about the shadow side, as Jung called it, of the human psyche, as Rick describes it, and a kind of journey through the underworld into reconciliation, truth and reconciliation. And then, the tech revolution, we've all seen what happened. Scientific paradigm shifts. And there's an episode called Liberating the Instinct, Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll that particularly tracks sexual revolutions and primarily gay rights movements and transgender and gender fluidity. And then, of course, the rise of cannabis and psychedelics, which are the greatest leaps forward in all these arenas since the 60s. And I could go on. I see Rick's back, so maybe we've got him in the game here too.
Well, yeah, thank
go
you.
ahead.
And I would love to just extend, honestly, like what you're saying, all these changes just everywhere. What's her name? Oya, the incredible goddess representing unbound, irresistible change. And I work with young people. I work with college students all the time. And you can feel that they know that we're in the middle of a lot of change. And they could feel it before the inflection moments came. And Dr. Tarnas, you've been looking at these alignments specifically of Pluto and Uranus for quite some time. You knew this was coming. You were working on this documentary before, and now me and Kenny, you guys actually adjusted it as you went. What was it like for you to go into this period knowing you were going to be working on something and knowing it was going to unfold before your eyes?
Well, first, can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, we can.
Is my audio okay? All right. Sorry, I was trying to do it with the AirPods, and that threw everything off. So, getting back to your original welcome, Will, thank you very much, and hello to your students that have been reading Passion of the Western Mind, and thanks for being so forgiving for me not being able to serve on your doctoral committee. It's hard to have doctoral committees on in both schools, being at CIS as well. But to your question, and thank you for welcoming me here, everyone, the Jungians, the Pacifica world that I know and love so well, and everybody else that's here. So, in terms of your question, I think it would be overstating it to say I knew it was coming, because what I have been able to do over the now many years, over 40 years of the research, is to recognize that there are these very powerful archetypal patterns that are quite visible in the collective psyche. I mean, the zeitgeist just seems to move in quite tangible ways. Everybody who went through the 60s remembers the quality of it, and those who don't remember it still can get a sense for it from the books, from the history, from the music, the films, etc. But and people have a sense of 9/11 or of what we've just been through with the and still are going through with the pandemic. There's a collective psyche at work in that we all participate in, and these archetypal patterns that are visible in the collective psyche. Depth psychologists are quite attuned to that. That's the kind of thing that Jung was tracking all the time, and especially in the later years of his, at the beginning when he was in the Red Book period, he was obviously very attuned to what was going on in Europe and the World War, and again in his last decade, he really addressed that collective psyche really as much as he was the individual psyche. But there's a difference between having a sense for the archetypal quality of a period that may be about to start, and knowing exactly what's going to happen, because archetypes are multivalent. They can express themselves in a wide range of ways, very positive, life enhancing, and also very potentially shadow sides and destructive and so forth. And also there's just a wide range of things. So what I did in Cosmos and Psyche is that that which I wrote in 20 years ago, and I set out here are the basic patterns I noticed, for example, in the Uranus-Pluto cycle. And in that cycle, we see over and over again a 10, 12, 13-year period in which there's a powerful revolutionary energy that seems to take over the psyche in a certain way. Social, political turmoil, revolutions, emancipatory movements, reform movements. And then I also got more specific. We see it with abolitionist movements and the civil rights movements. We see it with women's suffrage and the great emergences of feminism and women's rights. We see it with the liberation of the erotic instincts and so forth, technological revolutions, scientific revolutions. So I tracked all that. Also, these more shadow sides of the this kind of eruption of the will to power that can often happen as well. So I set out those patterns, and I did that for each of several big planetary cycles, not just the Uranus-Pluto. But Kenny Ausubel, who was, I heard about this from my students who were attending the Pioneers conferences, and he was clearly attuned. He had read Cosmos and Psyche, and he was recognizing how the movements that he and Pioneers had been so devoted to and working on behalf of for years were connected to these archetypal energies and to these patterns in history that the planetary alignments were coinciding with. So he took it on himself. He had this conception of turning all this material into a film series, into a documentary series, and that's what unfolded. And because I finished this before this finished the book before the Uranus-Pluto square began, he in about 2013, 14, 15, he started work on the film, gathered a team of filmmakers. And so all during this transit, he was basically almost like doing a test of how does history unfold? Does it actually seem to replicate or the basic pattern, but in new creative ways that are always unpredictable, but in some sense faithful to the archetypal energies that we've traced in the past. So that's the background to the series.
If I could add just one thing, Will, if I could
Please.
add just one thing to that. We basically consciously went to hold a mirror up to the zeitgeist. And in medicine, everybody's familiar with clinical trials, but there's something called OCTs, observational clinical trials, where, for example, they'll give out a medicine to the entire population of a city and then use that as a baseline against other locations. And this was basically an observational clinical trial.
Wow. I do want to specifically ask a little bit later when we have some more astrologers with us about method, because one thing that's so obviously moving about what you've done is you've employed a deep and rigorous method to what you've done and how you've gotten to where you are. And on that note, but I don't want to miss one of the things that you said, Rick, and then I want to come back to the point about pioneers, and that is that I think that many people see astrology, I think you called it the gold standard of esotericism or something like that, right? And
no, a little stronger. I said it's the gold standard of superstition in our culture.
Superstition, thank you.
It's what people, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, please.
Oh, I was simply going to say, if you want to compare, if you want to say that some particular field of study or research is just so ludicrous and unworthy of serious intellectual investigation, you compare it to astrology. You say this is no better than astrology, and it's kind of that's the ultimate standard. And I believe that I've given lectures on this. I think there's good reasons for why the modern mind had to turn away from astrological determinism and so forth. In some ways, I think it took depth psychology to come into a relationship to these archetypal powers in a way that we can have a more participatory, co-creative relationship to it instead of being puppets of them. But in any case, that's what I meant by it's the gold standards of superstition. And often, I think people in our audience tonight will recognize that often the most spiritually profound truths are veiled, and are concealed in ways that are looked down upon by the rest of the world, by the conventional authorities.
And that's what I want us to take. I feel like we got to take that head on. I mean, you're a philosopher. My background is philosophy. We're a lot of PhDs in here. You know, we want to look at astrology with a lot of rigor. And I think one of the things that you said that I think is so important is that you don't treat it as prophetic exactly. You're not exactly trying to forecast exactly what's going to happen in somebody's life. And I've even heard you discourage that activity over detailing what to expect in the future, and leaning more in this archetypal zone. Like, this is what's going on generally up there, and we might look for general reflections down here, archetypal reflections down here. And I just wanted to seize on that distinction, because I think it's very important when it comes to dismissible superstitions.
Right. I think it's very important, because I think astrology on its own terms is archetypally predictive, but not necessarily concretely predictive. And that's what opens up space for human freedom and kind of a collaborative agency in relationship to the anima mundi, to the soul of the world, to the unconscious, often unconscious archetypal energies that are getting constellated at any given time. I think the more we have a conscious relationship to them, then we have greater agency, and that's where astrology actually can increase our sense of freedom rather than constrain it. And I think that's one of the reasons Jung embraced it so much as the decades progressed in his life. By the end of the last decade, I know he was saying he was using horoscopes and looking at transits for all his patients. And I talked to a psychiatrist who had talked to him. This is 20 years ago when I talked to her, and was a friend of the family. And he didn't publicize, I think for good reason, he didn't publicize the extent of his engagement with astrology, I think for good reason. Just it's a good thing to protect the fledgling Jungian psychoanalytic or analytical movement and impulse in culture without getting it seen as being too esoteric.
Well, remember, he wrote to Freud and tried to tell him about some of these esoteric things he was doing, and Freud was appalled because he was so dedicated to forging this science that was believed in and trusted, that he was like, you got to keep that stuff away from this movement. And while obviously he went deeper into it than Freud ever would, maybe he learned the value of having some persona. And I before we go too far into, because this is where I want to go next, I want to invite the rest of our panelists in and talk specifically about this paradigm of astrology. I want to go just to that last thing you said about Bioneers, how this project came through a little bit. Bioneers, that you had students that were there. And I just wanted to, you were talking about the anima mundi, the soul of the world. I was wondering if Kenny, you could speak a little bit to the motivation behind this film and how it relates to your motivation to pursue, to do Bioneers. Is there an overlapping motivation between the two projects?
Well, yeah. I actually got exposed to astrology in 1973 when I fled the East Coast as a burnt-out activist and landed in San Francisco and befriended this mother and daughter. The mother was Russian and kind of looked like a tarot card and always wore red and black and really wanted me to get a reading. And oh, great, welcome to California, But I relented and it blew my mind. And then I moved not long after to Santa Fe and fell in with a circle of people in the very early days in Santa Fe who were doing essentially Abertine and planetary astrology and the kind of stuff that Rick is working on. And anyway, so I'd been, just held it as a personal hobby and a lens that I personally use, but it wasn't anything for polite company, And then I started Bioneers 30 plus years ago with my wife, Nina Simons. And, it's really about paradigm shifts, very fundamental paradigm shifts, very focused on nature and nature-based solutions, but also on progressive politics in that regard, liberation movements, freedom, justice, all of that. And so for me, it looked like the perfect way to bring together these worlds. In Bioneers, there's a thing I wrote years and years, decades ago, that's called the poem, which goes, it's all alive, it's all connected, it's all intelligent, it's all relatives. And that's kind of the essence of Bioneers' world. And that's throughout the film, actually comes up in various ways. And Rick is quite familiar with Bioneers at this point, but these are whom the people we consider to be the true revolutionaries of our time. And I would not have been interested in making a film that was just about correlations or sort of laying out that thesis. I want to know, what's the revolution now? What's the transformation? And I think many people want to know that. And, you know, one of the weird circumstances of particularly Uranus Pluto, the bucking bronco that I mentioned, is that it's kind of a blur. I mean, it's hard to even remember sometimes what happened last week because of the intensity and sheer volume of stuff that's happened. And that's one of the interesting things now, watching the film after the transit has tapered off, is it's a reminder of what happened. My God, what we've all been through, and it's much bigger than probably most of us ever realized. And I don't think anyone else has really cohered it all. It's certainly not through this archetypal lens. And one of the core principles, you know, from Bioneers, it's all intelligent, and the idea that nature is saturated with intelligence, right? But there's one step beyond that, which is sentience, that there is consciousness throughout nature and the cosmos. So that was really interesting to me in terms of Cosmos and Psyche, to sort of take the Bioneers world up to that next octave, while also depicting the contemporary revolution and paradigm shifts.
That's perfect setup for where I hope we'll go, you know, next. Honestly, I think that if we were talking about revolutions in most periods in history, a lot of periods at least, we'd be talking about something deconstructive, bringing something down. And what you're talking about with Bioneers, what we're talking about, it seems, with this film, is it seems more like there's a readiness to put something new forward, a new paradigm, not just tearing down an old paradigm, but constructing or envisioning a new one. We might be shifting from Nietzsche's era of the lion that destroys thou shalt into the new baby eyes that might be seeing a new reality. But before we do that, I want us to deconstruct or look at the paradigm that we might be leaving together. And to do that, I want to go ahead and invite in our other panelists. So first, let me welcome back Dana White, who many of you know is the host of our Myth Salon and is contributing faculty in Pacifica's Myth program. Thanks for kicking us off earlier. Welcome back, Dana.
Thank you.
Next, it's my privilege to introduce Safron Rossi. Safron is a scholar of literature, religion, mythology, archetypal, astrology, alchemy, and goddess traditions. She's the co-editor of Jung on Astrology and editor of Joseph Campbell's work on the feminine, Goddesses, Mysteries of the Feminine Divine, which serves as a bit of a counterbalance to his hero with 1,000 Faces. Safron worked on his book while serving as curator of Opus Archives, which preserves the work of Joseph Campbell, James Hillman, Maria Gimbutas, and others. She has since become core faculty member at Pacifica Graduate Institute and a faculty member at Astrology University. Her most recent book, The Kore Goddess, A Mythology and Psychology, was published in 2021. For more on her work, you'll want to check out her website, The Archetypal Eye. Safron's a leading scholar on astrology and the feminine divine. Thanks for being here with us tonight, Safron.
Thanks so much for inviting me. Hi, everyone.
Next, it's my honor to welcome Becca Tarnas. Becca Tarnas is a scholar of archetypal astrology, psychology, philosophy, and the imagination. Daughter of Richard Tarnas, Becca teaches at both Pacifica Graduate Institute and the California Institute of Integral Studies. I originally had the good fortune of discovering Becca through a student of mine obsessed with Lord of the Rings. He had come across her incredible dissertation on the 2 red books of Jung and Tolkien, which she presented on with us last year. Becca continues the family legacy of astrology, which I hope we'll hear a little bit about tonight. She served as editor of Archi, the Journal of Archetypal Astrology, and has authored numerous papers on the topic, not to mention poetry, plays, paintings, and novels. For more information on Becca, please visit beccatarnas.com. Thanks for being with us tonight, Becca.
Thank you so much for having me. My kittens too.
And your kitten. So this is for all of us, and it might start with you, Rick, but really I want to hear from everyone on this one. Is author of The Passion of the Western Mind, which I teach as a textbook in my philosophy classes I've mentioned, and has taught many all over the place. You're a master of the paradigms that have come before. And so why is it impossible from previous paradigms to accept astrology? Why did the Western mind part with it all that time ago? What was incompatible about astrology, and what are the forces, structures, and voices that are always leading us to repress and avoid and ignore astrology? What are the authorities? What are the conventional societal attitudes that lead us to live in this disenchanted, mechanistic worldview?
Well, that's such a simple, straightforward question, and it really only needs a half a sentence as an answer.
Perfect.
We teach whole courses, graduate seminars exploring the very issues, because in many ways the emergence of what we sometimes more simplistically call the modern worldview, when we're really talking about that the mechanistic, materialistic kind of the isolation of the Cartesian ego of the human being from the rest of the ensouled natural world, etc. That emerged with many forces going on, coming out of the Middle Ages, nominalism, the Renaissance, the Reformation played huge roles. But of course, the scientific revolution and the Copernican revolution in particular were especially consequential. It just suddenly we had a way of understanding the natural world that if we objectified it, neutralized it, by which I mean, turned it into an object rather than a sentient subject that we a communion of subjects, to use the kind of Teilhard Thomas Berry framing. By objectifying it, we were able to both feel a greater sense of human freedom to live our lives without any sense of cosmic determinism, or this is the way we have to be because this is the way it has been in the past, or also the determinism of there's also a kind of rebellion against a theological perspective that God might be controlling human and constraining human freedom. So there was a lot going into kind of removing a sense that this universe was intelligent, had moral, spiritual depths, that we are participating in something bigger. I think it was a kind of a birth process, and we're kind of at the end of that modern arc that was initiated at that time, as there's a tremendous breakdown in the assumptions by which we've shaped the modern worldview. They clearly have proved to be emancipatory, but also destructive, and in ways that are making us much less free than we were. So I think those are some headlines about why disenchantment came in. I mean, the Earth is moving, and that made it seem as if the Earth could not be a stable center of cosmic meaning. It was just one more physical material body moving around a material sun, and that's part of billions and billions of galaxies as that's emerged in the last in the last century. And that just seemed to not only decenter us, but also give cause to think that how could the cosmos have any particular focus on the Earth? How could it be? How could it have a kind of divine or archetypal intelligence that is focusing its meaning on what happens on the Earth? And I'll be quite frank with you that both Stan Groff and I, as we were dealing with this evidence in the early years, we found it pretty challenging to take in. I mean, we just sometimes shake our head and just think the level of cosmic intelligence and power that is at work that could orchestrate the movements of the planets and the movements of the archetypal dynamics of the anima mundi at the same time, so that human history and even our own individual experience are correlated with these movements, is so stunning, so astonishing, that the rational mind can't really wrap its mind around it.
And that's where I want to go to next, is where we start to crack, where it seems impossible that paradigm is true, what you started to see. But before we get to those cracks, I want to keep building on this paradigm that cracks. And you kept using the word matter as well. And, you know, the word matter is, of course, the Latin word for mother as much as it is for material. And so everything you just said about the paradigm of the world being seen as mechanistic, inert, you know, dead, objectified matter, all that objectification of matter also seems to have translated into an objectification of the feminine, and a recognition. And this is something, you know, I read in your book and find so inspiring. And you know, I wonder, Safron, if you might be willing to add any thoughts on how this paradigm that we hopefully may be leaving behind, but how this mechanistic paradigm or this modern paradigm might have had a negative effect on our relationship with the feminine divine.
Another kind of simple question. Yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, just, you know, sort of extending from what Rick was saying, that in an attempt to be able to discern means of control and understanding, measuring, and sort of, you know, rational systems of, you know, getting into, like, what is it that's happening in the world? What is it that's going on in nature? Attempts to categorize it and taxonomies and understand the mechanisms of it. The very sort of mystery that lives in matter like had to be broken to a certain degree, or the hold of the mystery had to be broken by these various sort of processes of thought and examination and, you know, understanding. And in, you know, in deeper symbolic terms, matter it has always been associated with the feminine sort of archetypal dimension. And very simply, I mean, in a very broad way to put this, you know, life comes from the female body, and so it is the source of the creation of all of life. And so in deep terms, there's always been a connection to that. Now, obviously, we can also look to the inheritance from the Judeo-Christian traditions, and the way that has viewed the feminine as imagined in, you know, the figures like Eve, Lilith, these mythic figures that, you know, carried that. So you know, so there are these threads. And I would also, the last thing I just want to add is that, you know, as Jung made the point that in the extraordinary development of the rational mind, the unconscious took the sort of cast of the feminine. And so there is also a big kind of almost huge tension between the conscious mind and the way that was associated with kind of masculine capacities for insight and light and awareness and thinking, intellectual capacity, very solar in a way. The unconscious, which includes the body and our emotional lives, took on the sort of lunar or feminine you know, I guess sort of shadows in a way. So we can even see it in those terms as well. And that's why in Jung's work, the relationship to the unconscious and a kind of restoration of our relationship to the feminine dimensions of life becomes so necessary for this sort of rebalancing between conscious and unconscious.
Thank you. And honestly, this was where I had the first time I read the end of Dr. Tarnas's Passion of the Western Mind. I was like, what do you mean? Why are you all of a sudden making this about masculine and feminine paradigms? I don't even get it. Like I see, but why? But now since that time, I've come to really see what's going on, where what's happened is over thousands of years of Western intellectual history, we have chosen the masculine option in the metaphor choice towards consciousness over body. Towards dead to see things as objectified as opposed to see things as alive, to see consciousness as transcendent as opposed to immanent, which I've heard you talk about as well. So, this is something that's so stunning to me, is that we seem to be in this paradigm shift. Part of what the paradigm shift seems to be is and you've talked about this, Jung's talked about this reintegration of the feminine, but how that's not just like women getting paid equally, that there are deep paradigms and metaphors and concepts that have been aligned with the feminine, that have been kept at arm's length, if not repressed, if not actively, criticized for so long. And so, as we talk about this paradigm shift, to me, that's just something that's so exciting and so inspiring to see. Before we go on to the next step, I just want to ask if anybody else has anything to add about the oppressiveness of the modern or previous paradigms and the deadening effect on our culture. Yes, please.
Well, I would love to just enter into this conversation too around the masculine and the feminine and the solar and the lunar, and how in that narrative where the masculine is identified as the solar self or the heroic center, then the feminine is what is othered, whether that is human women or the earth or the cosmos or the lunar. And I think part of changing that narrative is also recognizing that reintegrating the feminine is also allowing the feminine to be the solar hero or heroine at the center of the story. And so that shifts a lot when we relate it to, Jung's model of the psyche, for example, which is based on male psychology. And when we tell the solar feminine story from her perspective, it does start to shift the narrative in really interesting ways that aren't an exact mirror or parallel of what we see with the solar masculine story. So I just wanted to bring that in for a moment. Just that was coming to mind as Safron and Rick were speaking around how reintegrating the feminine is also not just incorporating the feminine into the masculine viewpoint and still keeping the masculine at the center, but what is the solar woman's experience? What is the Earth's experience through these? We're in an ecological crisis right now. What happens when we center the Earth's experience within that, rather than the human fear of what the ecological crisis means? Anyway, I could go on, but I just wanted to bring that forward. So thanks.
Well, we will. Thank you.
Will, if I could bring up one last point.
Oh, please.
Just the other thing that I think is critical to bring into the discussion is capitalism. And this is very close to, you're talking about the oppression of women. It's very much tied to the economics of that period. 1492, Uranus Pluto was also when Columbus, quote, discovered the Americas. Yeah, and you want to look at what science has been applied for. I mean, central to that is weaponry and all kinds of other exploitation. So I think we have to also put capitalism at the center of that discussion.
Absolutely. What I think is, when you objectify anything, then why not make money off of them, or use them as slaves, or treat them as this or as that? And I think that we're coming out of a paradigm of subject object, which sets up objectification, which sets up oppression. And so what I want to look at is, we look at the disruption of this paradigm and where we're going with the rest of this conversation. I just want us to be aware of what is the paradigm that's being challenged here. And this is a paradigm that's been fundamentally oppressive. And what each episode looks at is the vitality that's being restored to humanity in this moment where we're disrupting the oppression of Black voices, women's voices, LGBTQ, the Earth's voice. Each episode is representing some vitality that's been repressed, that's being restored. Okay, so I want to jump to the next question.
I think
but
Dana,
do you have a
wanted
thought
to
about
say
this?
something.
Yeah, please.
I feel that going to Kenny's comment on capitalism, when we moved as a species into a sense of a separate self, and we began to identify the divine as something external to ourselves rather than something that we were inhabited by or with, we lost that thread of interconnection with the natural world and with one another, that it seems to me that we've only capitalized upon that, and that individual wealth and individual definition and cultural definition became something that you could monetize, you could build it up, you could take it somewhere, you could even travel with it. But it became something that separated us and protected us from one another. And this is why I'm really pleased. I didn't know you had this, Kenny, with John Powell and othering, because I brought him up in another part of my life. Unbelievable fellow. The whole idea of incorporating the other into us breaks down the barriers that we have that separate us. And when we become one with whatever it is, whether it's a plant, an animal, a space, a time, we transcend that isolation in the here and now that is totally ego-based.
Perfect. Thank you, Dana. And that's exactly where I want us to go next. So let's say we're isolated. We're now trapped in our egos, trapped in our skin suits, trapped in, this isolatory mechanistic reality where we feel estranged, and we're just these small specks in a gargantuan universe, and we feel no meaning left. But now what? So now we get into astrology. This is the tradition you were raised in, Rick, and then you get out to Esalen, and you start to have some experiences where you're starting to question that paradigm and start to see some certain things that trigger you to follow astrology more sincerely. So what are the things, not just for you, but for anybody in the audience, what are the things that are just so obviously disruptive of that isolatory paradigm or of that mechanistic dead reality paradigm? What is so obviously disruptive about what astrology has to offer that it has to get our attention?
Well, I have a feeling that for many people, the opening up to astrology requires more than just an intellectual encounter with research. Our defenses are way too strong for that, and one can rationalize away pretty much everything, as every established paradigm has long experience in saying that, well, this evidence doesn't count for this reason or that. And I think it takes a kind of initiatory heart opening, really. It's something that, I mean, even in my own case, it was definitely something that was associated with my own inner work and inner journey, and that was one advantage of going from the East Coast and, that the kind of classical and then modern education that I had prior to coming to Esalen, and then coming to Esalen, which was such a place of transformational practices and really deep diving. And that's what permits the possibility of, I think, of a kind of epistemological opening that is tied to a heartful opening to the cosmos, to each other, to a greater mystery than our own rationality should claim to have understood, but rather
Mm.
is able to participate in. So I would, rather than, I've done my best to set out a good amount of pretty systematic evidence across history, and of course those who have done graduate seminars and workshops with me know I've also done it in relationship to the arts and to psychology, people's experiences in therapeutic contexts and so forth. But I don't think in the end it's just, even though I've done my best to provide compelling evidence, I think in the end it will take often it's a crisis that produces such a change. And I honestly think that that's what's happening in the world right now, is a level of crisis on so many fronts that a kind of ego death is taking place, and a kind of near-death experience that has so much power for reconfiguring our moral values and opening us up to a different worldview than we would ever be willing to do if we were completely feeling successful and on top of our lives, and really nailed down how to handle the planet. And we're obviously a great nation that has mastered the complexities of political and social relations and so forth. I mean, that's just obviously not the case. And this kind of many-sided crisis, I think, is having a profound, it's a profound opportunity that couldn't come any other way, which is, again, a truth that Jung often brought up. He himself could only have gone through his deep transformations because he was in a deep crisis. And I think that's one thing to keep in mind as we engage both the evidence and also engage the crisis, is that it's a kind of initiation, I think.
Will, can I
Very
just add
interesting. Absolutely, please. I was hoping y'all would.
Yeah, early on with the project, when we had films, and clips I could show people, it was clear that they were really moved, deeply moved. And I'm Socratic by nature and a journalist by trade, and so I ask a lot of questions. And what I got to when I got beneath the surface was that whether you call it God or spirit or consciousness or the great mystery, what astrology really reveals is that the invisible world is real. We don't understand it, and maybe we never will, but we are actually part of something much larger, and there is this pervasive consciousness. And I think it's just a moment when people are really ready for that. And what Rick is describing about the near-death experience, that's existential. We're living with that. This is for real. As Rick says, there are no fake near-death experiences. So we got to break through to the other side one way or the other here. And it is about a belief system. Rick's beautiful statement, worldviews create worlds. So I think that's a lot of what's going on. And then also there are different polarities to this. We've gotten feedback from the religious right. Astrology is demonic, right? What do you mean changing of the gods? There's only one God, right? Obviously, our gods is not a reference to God in that same theological sense. And then the secular left is equally, we're an equal opportunity offender, but the secular left, people have told me, well, this takes away my agency. When, of course, my perspective is exactly the opposite. But, that this disempowers me somehow. So it's complicated in terms of the disruptive aspect.
Yeah, what I teach is narrative structure, right? So when we look a lot at how to get, all of story structure is about how to move something out of the status quo, how to go from one status quo to a new status quo. Every good story, that's what it is. And so it's always setting up the world as it is and then disrupting it. And there are all kinds of terms for that: the call to adventure, the inciting incident, the disequilibrium event, the increase of awareness. All these things seem to be the things that have to happen to jostle us out of another paradigm. And it seems like, some of the things that you guys are talking about is, once you start to see the overwhelming amount of correlations, then it's hard to not see it again. Or, once you see or have a personal break, a personal experience with an alignment, then it's hard to go back from that. And now you're talking about going through to the other side and begin to accept this journey and crossing this. I think you described it as a paradigm boundary or paradigm threshold. I was wondering if we could hear a little bit more about that. What does it mean to cross the paradigm threshold? And I was wondering actually if Becca could say a little bit about this, because I know she's been teaching on synchronicity. So I was wondering if you could tell us just a little bit, what paradigm does astrology require? Are we still in a causality that is just more subtle than we knew before? What's going on to make astrology work?
Well, in terms of, and you heard Rick say this in the episode, that rather than seeing the of the planets or the alignments between the planets as causing in some physical way the events unfolding on Earth or in our own lives, rather we're seeing this kind of synchronization. And that a metaphor that Rick will often use, that I'm going to draw on, is of a clock. So if you look at a clock and it says that it's 6:30 p.m., that clock isn't causing it to be 6:30 p.m. It's indicating that's what time it is. And the same is in some ways true of the solar system, that when we look at the positions of the planets, they're telling us what the quality of time is in that moment. And now Jung articulated his theory of synchronicity, where throughout the decades of his career, he began to recognize these patterns where someone would be having some kind of an internal experience, a particular emotion or psychological state, or maybe a dream, and then something would happen in the outside world that would perfectly mirror that inner event. So a meaningful coincidence. And what's at the core of that is that they share an archetypal meaning. That there's I won't recount it, but there's the kind of paradigmatic case that he gives of his patient with the scarab dream. There you go. And the scarab who comes up to the window and he brings the scarab in. So astrology is, now the amazing thing, if you track synchronicities in your life and you get a sense of, well, what's the archetypal core of that synchronicity? And then you have the astrological perspective and you look, what are the transits at the moment of that synchronicity? The amazing thing is it's almost like a third synchronicity, that the archetype that's informing that event in your life is the archetype correlated with the particular planetary alignment that's in the sky at that moment, whether that's a personal transit, something that's kind of focused on you as an individual, or a world transit, something that's collective. And what this film demonstrates, and what Cosmos and Psyche demonstrates with more planetary combinations, is that what we see with all of these parallel movements unfolding either all at the same time around the world or mirroring each other back through history, is that these are ongoing synchronicities. And so we can't really point to it in that efficient causal sense, to use the Aristotelian term. It's more of, it's an archetypal causation, not a physical causation. And as Kenny was saying, that's where this seems to point towards a greater intelligence of the cosmos itself, you could say, that's orchestrating things in a way far beyond any kind of physical causation that could possibly be unfolding.
Wow. And what you're saying is just, it's just so different than what I thought astrology was when I first learned about astrology. And when I've mentioned that I was doing this event to a few people and they've expressed their understanding of astrology, and it always seems to be looking for some type of causality, some electromagnetic fields or gravity waves or entanglement or something like that. And with this shift to synchronicity is the kind of underlying way of understanding what's going on. That was kind of revelatory to me, and I really appreciate you explaining that. And I just wanted to see if anybody else, since it seems to be so important and such a hallmark feature of what archetypal astrology is, I was wondering if anybody else wants to add to what you've just said. Yes, please, Rick.
I could, and then I'd love to hear Safron as well. But just briefly, my sense is that I think the description by Plotinus, the greatest of the late classical philosophers and the founder of Neoplatonism, he was both writing both to deal with the those who rejected astrology, but also those who looked at astrology as causal in a kind of deterministic way. And he said, rather than that the planets are not causes, they're signs. He said the movements of the heavens are like a kind of cosmic script of meaning. And then he said, the world is full of signs. Everything is, and this is my phrase, everything is pregnant with meaning and is communicating if we have eyes to see, ears to hear. And then he goes on to say, everything is interconnected. As has been said, everything breathes together. And I love that. I love that phrase, everything breathes together, because that captures a kind of coherence of an underlying unity. Anima mundi, the world soul. Anima is breath. It's the soul of life. It's the breath of life. It also is carrying the meaning of life, and we all participate in it, and we're all interconnected and kind of breathing together. So what I think we're seeing here is a kind of a vision of the universe as being integrated through and through, inner and outer, matter and spirit, above and below, the heavens and the earth. So the human and the more than human. All these are in a greater integrated, meaningful unity.
Y'all are taking me into a very different world than the world that I feel like most of us are living in every day. This idea that we're connected, that the world is breathing together, that there's a relationship between inner and outer. I feel like Neo leaving what he thought was the normal world, hearing from Morpheus, and now wanting to puke because it's so overwhelmingly different. I want to hear more about. So now I want to learn about how do I how do I learn what you've just said? How do I train into what you've just described? How do I learn about this paradigm? How do I get used to this paradigm? How did you get used to this paradigm? How was this researched? Can you tell me about the journey or the process or the road of trials to actually deepen my relationship with this paradigm that you're describing of astrology? And I know, Safron, if you had anything to say about what we just were talking about, please do. Or if you'd be interested in telling us some about how Jung began his process of learning about astrology and researching it, I'd love to hear both.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe what I would just add from just the of course beautiful articulations that Becca and Rick both gave on synchronicity. And so this is just maybe another sort of valence or a way to imagine what this paradigm review is about, is that, I mean, I think part of what is going on, what it speaks to, is our need for cosmological imagination. And, you know, you may remember that, you know, Joseph Campbell talked about there being 4 functions to myth: the mystical, the cosmological, the psychological, and the pedagogical. And the cosmological has to do with how it is that we come to relate to and understand on some level the energies or powers that create the universe as we know it, the world as we know it. And I think that we collectively, where we are as a quality of the time, we are in desperate need for a much more vivified and expanded cosmological imagination. And I think astrology practiced and approached in these ways, both from the archetypal astrological tradition, but also from a depth psychological tradition, it offers that to people. People begin to be able to imagine that their individual life and the experiences that they've had are actually tethered, echoed, threaded with these cosmological rhythms that, again, don't dictate what it is that you were going to experience or limit you, but rather had resonances or rhythms or patterns. And I think that in my experience, so Rick talking about the epistemology and the heart, of course, made me think of James Hillman, who talked about a knowing of the world as a heart's epistemology. I think that when people have these experiences in readings or in their own study of astrology and their chart and life experience, that connection to the cosmological imagination really touches the heart. And there's, I think, a sense of alienation or being very alone that all of a sudden shifts. And this is not like a rational thing that we can talk about. And I don't even know if we should, but I think that there's a sense of being deeply seen. See, that's something that belongs to synchronicities as an experience. Like we feel seen by, like, how did this thing just happen in this outer event that is so connected to this inner feeling I have or this dream that I just had? There's a sense that perhaps there's this knowing and even loving intelligence that's like turning on the light for us to pay attention. And I think astrology is a practice. I often call it a soul practice that can kindle those kinds of experiences. So I realize I just kind of went on for a minute there, but just talking about synchronicity,
I'm glad you did.
Yeah, just opens all of that up. But I want to hear everyone else. So
what you're saying is exactly what I was looking for. Is how would I start to go down this journey? And what you're describing is, if I start just keeping a journal with my own relationship with the cosmos, that I'm just going to start feeling the participation and seeing more and deepening my relationship, and more might open. I think try to do that.
I think tracking synchronicities, of course, is part of it, but given, half of us here are astrologers, I think that, having a good reading or several readings with good astrologers brings this home in a way, because it's not just you're interpreting your experience, you're somewhat moving into a more you can have the input of someone who knows how to read, both in terms of the craft of astrology, which is a very complicated craft, but also the archetypal signatures, and that will then highlight periods of your life that you can then really reflect on and begin to see the larger arc or cycles or stories that are, or we could even say the myths that are at work in you, that these different points by transit would sort of bring out, shine a light on in a particularly strong way. So, I think just in terms of your basic question of, well, how do I sort of learn more of this? I actually think it's having the experience of having a handful of good astrology readings and, conversations.
Yeah,
I shouldn't trust my own ego to interpret all the signs.
Right.
My ego is a dangerous interpreter.
And I will say that in Cosmos and Psyche, Rick has this whole section where he talks about how we have to sort of cultivate a sort of objective point of view when we're working with these symbols. And I love that section so much. And because it draws attention to, we can only see what we can see. And so when you're sitting with an astrologer, just like when you're sitting with perhaps your therapist or your analyst, there's something else that's coming that hopefully you have the capacity to take in, to be like, whoa, I didn't see that. So we need an other to help, disrupt our, our ego consciousness, which can be quite entrenched, and we just see things and interpret things the way we do.
Yeah, I think if I could just add to that, the idea of getting first of all, one good astrological interpretation of your birth chart is an incomparable gift, but because a birth chart is like a deep poem of that no one translator, as like a poem of Rumi's or Rilke's, no one translator is ever going to completely unpack the meaning that is in there. And every birth chart has its own nobility and its own so that more than one astrological interpretation helps unfold that more and more. But for those who are most drawn into it, and it can become quite compelling once one kind of gets the insight. If you ever can track your own transits, you learn how to calculate your own transits, which isn't that complicated. It just takes a little discipline, a little memorization of almost like not much more than having to memorize the times tables when you're young. But once you're able to calculate your own transits and you have a good interpretive, like reference works to work with, and then you keep a journal and show, like, here's the transit that I have during this couple year period, and then see how that relates to a period many years earlier when that transit may have also taken place, and to see the archetypal parallels, but at the same time see the way it become inflected in a new way. That's the fastest way of kind of, I think, it becoming a part of one's being. It's like tracking the gods somehow, and also it's a kind of honoring of them. And there's also this kind of aesthetic delight in the beauty of the incredible orchestration of the planetary movements in our inner life. So I think the more one can do it oneself, that's a tremendous emancipation. But a first step is to get a good reading.
You said aesthetic delight. I might add existential relief. If the paradigm that we're coming from is one that makes us feel so isolated and alone, and what you're talking about is a way to basically track the way that you are in relation, that you are not just in a vacuum of existence, seems like existential balm to our hyper individualism. And that's where I want to, we've been building up this paradigm that supports astrology. Let's go back to that other one and finish killing it a little bit. Passion of the Western mind, right? What is the passion? What is this ego death that you're talking about? Let's get back to the moment now. Okay, let's bring astrology back to the situation that we're in. How does it show that what do you mean when you're showing that it's walking us through, or pointing that we're going through a kind of death, a collective death and rebirth?
I wonder if I could suggest that, because a lot of what you've been bringing up right now has to do with the opening up of a worldview that is and paradigm, et cetera, that transcends what we've been going through, and in some ways is at the other end of this kind of initiatory ordeal and death and rebirth that we're clearly involved in. I wonder if Kenny might want to just say a little bit about the 10th episode, the final episode, which really addresses, it places astrology within the larger context of a number of great impulses that are happening right now that are opening up a wider, deeper worldview of our interconnectedness and wholeness.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rick. Well, you've all seen today, hopefully, episode 1. And so we kind of, that's the setup and the premise and the terms of engagement. And we ask these questions: do we live in a random, meaningless universe, or is there order in the chaos, and so forth? So the last episode is really the payoff to that. And so it begins with, it's a little more complicated because the prior episode, which is about scientific revolutions, goes into some of the paradigmatic shifts that Rick is referring to, that intelligence pervades all of nature, as opposed to the traditional modern mind that only human beings are intelligent and we're superior to everybody. It's a preceding setup. But we're into the mystery of consciousness here. And truthfully, nobody knows anything at this point. I mean, it's really in its infancy. And so we explore the work. Well, Will Keepin, some of you may know from this community, who's also been a colleague of Rick's, and Will and his wife Cynthia. But Will talks about David Bohm's work, who sought very consciously to reconcile quantum physics with particularly Eastern spiritual traditions, what the belief system is, or the worldview from that point of view. And he talks about what he calls holo movement, that life is movement, and we basically live in a cosmos of unbroken wholeness where everything is connected ultimately. What Rick was saying about everything breathes together. Bohm also advanced the idea of the implicate order and the explicate order. The explicate order being the physical world, our senses, the mind, we could see, feel, hear, touch, etc. And the implicate order being kind of everything else, dark matter, for lack of a better term. And everybody assumes the explicate order is the foundational order, and Bohm flipped that and said, no, actually, the explicate order is like the foam on the waves of the ocean, right? The ocean is actually the source in that way, the invisible world, again, in that sense. And then we also go into, and Rick speaks so eloquently about synchronicity and Jung. And it was interesting because listening to you guys talk, we approached this as a movie, and again, we had to visualize it. And one of the hardest things was, how do you visualize the story of synchronicity? Oh my God. The Golden Scarab does not lend itself to a filmic treatment that's concise, certainly. And most of these experiences are so subjective and so personal that it may not resonate for other people, Anyway, long story short, in episode 10, what we finally found was, at the Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville, Kentucky, there's this large sign that says "float like a butterfly, sting like a bee." And suddenly it was swarmed with bees on the trees surrounding it. And this then happened on the same day that his body was brought back to Louisville for burial. So, I mean, there's synchronicity for you, right? Anyway, and then episode 10 also has a kind of round robin of several of our interview subjects reflecting on the state of the world and what this moment means. And we didn't know. We shot most of these interviews in 2015, 2016, almost, I think, all of them actually. And fortunately, they have endured wonderfully. But one of the things that, ironically, here we are looking to the heavens, to the stars, to astrology. And really, the overriding message of the film is, getting back to Earth, to this terrestrial reality that we all live on, with, about, etc. And so it's a very poignant and passionate ecological message, the nice little planet if you can keep it, right? And then it's really a message of, as John Powell puts it, that we are the cosmos. We are a conscious expression of the cosmos becoming conscious of itself. It's a story of interbeing and co-creation, of quite literal evolution, that we are all co-creating each other all the time. And I think it's back to that everything breathes together, and living into that connection rather than trying to escape from it into this kind of psychosis of hyper-individualism. Rick, is that what you were driving at?
Yeah, I knew that if you brought in the how much the 10th episode really kind of engages this particular theme, it would be worthwhile our hearing about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is exactly where I wanted us to make sure we landed tonight. I mean, this film is such an incredible assembly of things going on, on one level, where it's like you're talking about these movements in the heavens that are in synchronicity with transformations, paradigmatic shifts on the earth, which seem to be some of the greatest shifts that we've experienced in a long time. And those shifts seem to be about shifts towards and away from individualism and isolation and towards wholeness, which is towards an integration, which means reintegrating that which has been repressed for so long, which is what everybody that's feeling tyrannized and frustrated by tyranny is pushing for. So whether it's the marginalized feminine or the marginalized economic structures or the oppression of the earth itself, all of these things seem to be rising right now. And what's so incredible is the way this, you kind of draw this stunning circle around how you can, I don't know, I almost have a mystical experience trying to make sense of how all these are true at once. How what's happening up there is so representative of what we're experiencing here. And I wonder if before we go, if we could hear just anything else about, Uranus and Pluto. I wanted to get just a little bit of a touch on those guys. Literally, Prometheus is like a core word in all of my passwords. I close my eyes and the word Prometheus comes through my head. It's such an influence on me. And so I would miss the chance to ask y'all, what is, can you just say just a little bit about Prometheus and Pluto right now?
Well, I suppose
anybody who wants to take it as we run short on time.
Yeah. Well, two quick things. I mean, the Uranus seems to be connected to the basic principle of the movement towards the new and the unexpected. It's a creative trickster in the cosmos, and it also seems to be connected to this impulse for liberation, for freedom, for originality, also for creativity, inventiveness, technological breakthroughs, etc. It seems a lot to do with the myth of Prometheus, though there isn't Uranus, the Greek god of the heavens, of the sky, is also connected. We have to remember that it's not like a literal one-to-one. The myths are multivalent, just the planetary types are. So it's a complex relationship. The Plutonic, by contrast, has to do with the great kind of cosmic depths and power of transformation that bring about both destruction and creation. It has a lot to do with nature's powers, with the depths of the underworld, with the depths of our own psyche's underworld, as well as of the psychological and sexual and urban and criminal and so forth, but it has this kundalini power and transformational energies that are carried in the myths of Kali and certain aspects of Shiva and Pele, the Hawaiian goddess of the volcanic energies and so forth. So that's a little bit about them. I don't want to leave without saying something about the fact that even though we're describing this kind of seemingly impossible paradigm shift to an astrological perspective, the fact of the matter is modernity and our particular culture is a kind of local, its worldview is kind of a rather recent and local one that is compared with the rest of humanity's history and culture is we're the odd person out, and the isolation of meaning and purpose away from, kind of extracting it from the universe and taking all soul and intelligence and purpose and putting it in only human beings. That's unique to modernity, and so there's been a kind of astrological perspective that pervades most societies from time immemorial. So in a way, I think we've been going on a kind of solar journey of, I don't want to put down the tremendous even nobility as well as dynamism of our civilization and modernity and Western culture, et cetera. There's so much that's noble and valuable about it. And I try to hold that nuanced complexity and wholeness in our perspective. But at the same time, we seem to be at the end of a kind of solar journey and kind of descending we're going through a great descent. The postmodern is a great descent, and I think it's a descent into the depths, into reconnecting to our own depths, to the cosmic depths, into the lunar matrix of being, into the night sky that carries all this deep meaning. So I think there's great symbolic. You're a narrative person, Will, and I think there's a powerful narrative that is at work in this opening of the contemporary mind and reopening of it to a cosmic intelligence and beauty and soul that we have occluded from our vision.
Gosh, I sure hope so. And I love what you're saying about the solar journey, and we think about that rise of the sun separating from Earth for the first half of the day to achieve its individualism and its isolation, and then of course the second half of the day it's going to remerge, so that by the time it's born again as something that has spent all night working in the underworld before it comes and surfaces again, and so I very much hope that that's what we're experiencing. And I want to thank all of you for walking us through some of that journey tonight. And before we go, I want to ask everyone if they have any final reflections before a final invitation to see the rest of the series. I thought maybe we'll start with you, Becca, and then Safron, and then Kenny and Dana. And this is fine for my final words. So thank everybody for joining us. This has been a really moving night for me, and a conversation I've been looking forward to for a very long time. And so, yes, please, Safron, any final thoughts that you might have for us?
I don't think so. It's just been it's been a great conversation, and to gather in celebration of this series that, learning that the interviews took place in 2015-16 and the film is coming out now. Wow. I mean, talk about a birthing moment. So I just want to acknowledge that work and thanks for letting me be a part of this conversation.
You said something I forgot to say, that this mad meta reality that this film is being born at a time where this birth moment seems to be happening for a culture. So what a stunning alignment in and of itself. Thanks for pointing that out before we go. Becca, any final words for us?
I would love to just end with a very brief synchronicity story related to the film that kind of demonstrates how astrology and archetypes and synchronicity have come through in this. And this was a story shared with me by one of the producers of the film, Maximilian de Arman, who he was working on the episode on Black liberation movements. And he was working on it in the summer of 2020 and bringing together all of this footage on Black Lives Matter protests from 2014 onward. And in the footage, there's the chanting, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. And then he starts to hear an echo, and it's not in the headphones. And then he takes the headphones off and realizes there's chanting Black Lives Matter on the street outside the office. And that there is a protest, summer of 2020, going on right outside the office as he's working on the episode. So he gets up, brings a camera, goes out into the street, joins them marching, films the protest, and then that's actually in the episode. And it's just this extraordinary synchronization of working on the film, telling the story in real time as the transits are unfolding. And I just think it's such an amazing experience that he had working on that particular episode. So I feel like it kind of ties together a lot of the threads that we've been talking about here, about how synchronicity and astrology really align in so many complex ways. So thanks. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this.
Oh, thank you for joining. What an amazing breakdown of subject-object divide and participation mystique. Incredible. Thank you for sharing that story. And Kenny, any
Yeah.
final words for us before we go to Dana, and maybe an invitation to people for where they can see the rest of the series?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually, I'm so glad this moment has come, because one thing that I love about film is that it's a collaborative medium, and I love to work in teams of creative people. And so, for one thing, I want to, again, as always, honor and give my most profound gratitude to Rick, who has been such a player in the whole process and helped us vet it and helped us get the language right and all. I could go on and on, but thank you, Rick, from the bottom of my heart.
Thanks, Ken.
And then there's been a tremendous amount of synchronicity around my collaborators. And I actually had met Becca early on, when I was, initially working with Rick, and she was going to help be a researcher, but it ended up not working out. And said, I know this guy, Maximilian D. Arman, and, maybe he could do it. Well, Max ended up being the other producer of the entire film. He is an absolute genius. He's one of the two best producers I've ever worked with. It literally could not have been done without him. And then my lead editor is Theo Badashi, who is, you saw this quality of his editing and the beautiful, incredible graphic artwork. But both Theo and Max are students of Rick's. And so this film would not be what it is without that aspect of it. They really knew the material and actually understand what we've been trying to do. And they had a vision in a retreat at Esalen around 2014 or so, I don't remember the year, 2013, 2012, that Rick and I needed to meet, and we needed to marry Cosmos and Psyche with pioneers. So talk about synchronicity. And then I also just want to honor and acknowledge my wife, Nina Simons, and a woman named Lori Benenson, who have been profound partners as creative consultants, from day one, and have watched it 1,000 times and, been made, there are a lot of fingerprints on it. A lot of people have contributed massively on the creative end of it. So I'm just so grateful for that. And the only other things I would say is, we made it independently, and as you can see, it wasn't cheap. And part of my hope here is that this will become an astrological Trojan horse if it's successful, and open up the space for many more very worthy projects to come about. I would love to see somebody form an astrology foundation that is kind of basically astrology for social and environmental benefit. How could it actually be moved into the society in meaningful ways? A couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, a parliamentarian in the UK wanted to bring astrology formally into the National Health Service for mental health services. I mean, what a great idea. The possibilities are endless. And obviously, as Jungians, you're therapists and counselors, and, this is so invaluable. And I really honor what you all are doing. So I hope you'll hope you'll spread the word. I hope you'll buy the series. If you go to changingofthegods.com, it's now temporarily forwarded to the distributor's website. The only caveat I would give you is they send out emails every day. You'll definitely, if that's a problem for you, then be aware of that. But, hopefully you can look past that. And let me see if the one last, I'll make it very, very brief, but astrology has been person-centered, and in that sense also very ego-centered. And what also fascinated me about world transits is it changes the pronoun from me to we. We're actually all in the soup together. And that is perhaps the single most profound transformation that needs to happen now. Hyper-individualism is killing us, literally, and killing the planet. And so let's change our pronoun to we. Well, I'll leave it there.
Wow, beautiful. Rick, before we close it out, do you have any final thoughts for us you'd like to add?
No, I think I've shared enough, and people have heard enough, and except to say thank you to everyone here who was both who we're seeing on the screen, who gave their insights well tonight, and then also those who are attending, listening in at their homes. So that's all. I think you've heard plenty from me.
Thank you. And obviously for more, there are 9 episodes. All right. Well, it's been a wonderful evening for me. Dana, I believe you have a poem to end the evening with.
Oh, cool.
Well, thank you, Will. And I want to share that I am immensely honored to be on this panel, to be working with you, Will, in the Myth Salon, and thanking Corinne for the work in putting this together, and Pacifica the Alumni Association. It is one great big we. We are a community. And the poem that I want to read is called Othering. And it really came about through my exposure to John Powell in Berkeley. I am most true to myself when I transcend selectivity, when I can accept all differences as virtues speaking to me, when otherness and the spirits of belonging are infinite, when my skills at othering are boundless, the uniqueness of everything flows through my hand like water, nourishing, unsullied by recognition, without language, walls, borders, or fences. I am most true to myself when trust and love are universal, when my skills at othering make me curious, not fearful, cautious, or apprehensive. I'm most true to myself when I am seen and listen, when I become the other to whatever it is that I think I am, and discover myself for the first time. Simply put, I am because you are. So I'd like to thank everybody on behalf of Will and the Myth Salon and Pacifica and everybody, and go forth, do good things, be well, be great people, and love, trust.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dana. Thanks, everybody.